easier than all this radionet business.
Need a drop. Go, go, go! Let's go! Gotta go!
Enemy spotted B.
Spike down B. Shoot. One enemy remaining.
Go, go, go!
Enemy spotted.
Flawless.
Reloading. We know what we're doing. Trust each other and we'll be fine.
There.
عشان ما كنتش انا والله جلست الله بغيت نتحرك كتبوا لي خربت معايا هنا
Enemy spotted A.
You should run. Gotta go!
The hunt begins. Spike planted.
On cooldown.
Light munition.
Last player standing.
هنا عمر يا
Flawless.
Raina, still hungry? I'm sure my pets can chase out some game for ya.
Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Chapter. Afraid he would do something awful, watched him and watched the women, and yes, she flirted with the men in a strange, nerve-wracking kind of way. There she was, dressed, as they say, to kill, with her mouth redder than any blood, dressed in something which was either the wrong color or too tight or too young, the cocktail glass in her hand threatening, at any instant, to be reduced to shards, to splinters, and that voice going on and on like a razor blade on glass. When I was a little boy and I watched her in company, she frightened me. But no matter what was happening in that room, my mother was watching it. She looked out of the photograph frame, a pale, blonde woman, delicately put, together, dark-eyed, and straight-browed, with a nervous, gentle mouth. But something about the way the eyes were set in the head and stared straight out,
Enemy remaining.
something very faintly sardonic and knowing in the set of the mouth suggested that somewhere beneath this tense fragility was a strength as various as it was unyielding and, like my father's wrath, dangerous because it was so entirely unexpected. My father rarely spoke of her, and when he did, he covered, by some mysterious means, his face. He spoke of her only as my mother, and, in fact, as he spoke of her, he might have been speaking of his own. Ellen spoke of my mother often, saying what a remarkable woman she had been, but she made me uncomfortable. I felt that I had no right to be the son of such a mother. Years later, when I had become a man, I tried to get my father to talk about my mother. But Ellen was dead, he was about to marry again. He spoke of my mother, then, as Ellen had spoken of her, and he might, indeed, have been speaking of Ellen. They had a fight one night when I was about 13. They had a great many fights, of course. But perhaps I remember this one so clearly because it seemed to be about me. I was in bed upstairs, asleep. It was quite late. I was suddenly awakened by the sound of my father's footfalls on the walk beneath my window. I could tell by the sound and the rhythm that he was a little drunk, and I remember that at that moment a certain disappointment, an unprecedented sorrow entered into me. I had seen him drunk many times and had never felt this way. On the contrary, my father sometimes had great charm when he was drunk. But that night I suddenly felt that there was something in him to be despised. I heard him come in. Then, at once, I heard Ellen's voice. "Aren't you in bed yet?" my father asked. He was trying to be pleasant and trying to avoid a scene, but there was no cordiality in his voice, only strain and exasperation. "I thought," said Ellen coldly, "that someone ought to tell you what you're doing to your son, what I'm doing to my son." And he was about to say something more, something awful. But he caught himself and only said, with a resigned, drunken, despairing calm, "What are you talking about, Ellen? Do you really think?" she asked. I was certain that she was standing in the center of the room, with her hands folded before her, standing very straight and still. "That you're the kind of man he ought to be when he grows up?" And, as my father said nothing, "He is growing up, you know." And then, spitefully, asterisk, "which is more than I can say for you, is more than I can say for you." "Go to bed, Ellen," said my father, sounding very weary. I had the feeling, since they were talking about me, that I ought to go downstairs and tell Ellen that whatever was wrong between my father and myself we could work out between us without her help. And, perhaps, which seems odd, I felt that she was disrespectful of me, for I had certainly never said a word to her about my father. I heard his heavy, uneven footfalls as he moved across the room, towards the stairs. "Don't think," said Ellen, "that I don't know where you've been." "I've been out drinking," said my father, "and now I'd like to get a little sleep. Do you mind?" "You've been with that girl, Beatrice," said Ellen. "That's where you always are, and that's where all your money goes and all your manhood and self-respect, too." She had succeeded in making him angry. He began to stammer. If you think that I'm going to stand here and argue with you about my private life, if you think I'm going to argue with you about it, why, you're out of your mind." "I certainly don't care," said Ellen, "what you do with yourself. It isn't you I'm worried about. It's only that you're the only person who has any authority over David. I don't, and he hasn't got any mother, and he only listens to me when he thinks it pleases you. Do you really think it's a good idea for David to see you staggering home drunk all the time? And don't fool yourself," she added after a moment, in a voice thick with passion. "Don't fool yourself that he doesn't know where you're coming from. Don't think he doesn't know about your women." She was wrong. I don't think I did know about them, or I had never thought about them. But from that evening I thought about them all the time. I could scarcely ever face a woman without wondering whether or not my father had, in Ellen's phrase, been interfering with her. "I think it barely possible," said my father, "that David has a cleaner mind than yours." The silence, then, in which my father climbed the stairs was by far the worst silence my life had ever known. I was wondering what they were thinking, each of them. I wondered how they looked. I wondered what I would see when I saw them in the morning. "And listen," said my father suddenly, from the middle of the staircase, in a voice which frightened me. "All I want for David is that he grow up to be a man. And when I say a man, Ellen, I don't mean a Sunday school teacher. And when I say a man, Ellen, I don't mean a Sunday school teacher. A man," said Ellen shortly, "is not the same thing as a bull. Good night." "Good night," he said after a moment, and I heard him stagger past my door. From that time on, with the mysterious, cunning, and dreadful intensity of the very young, I despised my father and I hated Ellen. It is hard to say why. I don't know why. But it allowed all of Ellen's prophecies about me to come true. She had said that there would come a time when nothing and nobody would be able to rule me, not even my father. And that time certainly came. It was after Joey. The incident with Joey had shaken me profoundly, and its effect was to make me secretive and cruel. I could not discuss what had happened to me with anyone. I could not even admit it to myself. And, while I never thought about it, it remained, nevertheless, at the bottom of my mind, as still and as awful as a decomposing corpse. And it changed, it thickened, it soured the atmosphere of my mind. Soon it was I who came staggering home late at night. It was I who found Ellen waiting up for me. Ellen and I who wrangled night in and night out. My father's attitude was that this was but an inevitable phase of my growing up, and he affected to take it lightly. But beneath his jocular, boys-together air, he was at a loss, he was frightened. Perhaps he had supposed that my growing up would bring us closer together, whereas now that he was trying to find out something about me, I was in full flight from him. I did not want him to know me. I did not want anyone to know me. And then, again, I was undergoing with my father what the very young inevitably undergo with their elders. I was beginning to judge him, and the very harshness of this judgment, which broke my heart, revealed, though I could not have said it then, how much I had loved him, how that love, along with my innocence, was dying. My poor father was baffled and afraid. He was unable to believe that there could be anything seriously wrong between us. And this was not only because he would not then have known what to do about it. It was mainly because he would then have had to face the knowledge that he had left something, somewhere undone, something of the utmost importance. And since neither of us had any idea of what this so significant omission could have been, and since we were forced to remain in tacit league against Ellen, we took refuge in being hardy with each other. We were not like father and son. My father sometimes proudly said we were like buddies. I think my father sometimes actually believed this. I never did. I did not want to be his buddy. I wanted to be his son. What passed between us as masculine candor exhausted and appalled me. Fathers ought to avoid utter nakedness before their sons. I did not want to know, not anyway from his mouth, that his flesh was as unregenerate as my own. The knowledge did not make me feel more like his son or buddy. It only made me feel like an interloper, and a frightened one at that. He thought we were alike. I did not want to think so. I did not want to think that my life would be like his, or that my mind would ever grow so pale, so without hard places and sharp sheer drops. He wanted no distance between us. He wanted me to look on him as a man like myself. But I wanted the merciful distance of father and son, which would have permitted me to love him. One night, drunk, with several other people on the way back from an out-of-town party. The car I was driving smashed up. It was entirely my fault. I was almost too drunk to walk and had no business driving. But the others did not know this, since I am one of those people who can look and sound sober while practically in a state of collapse. On a straight, level piece of highway, something weird happened to all my reactions, and the car sprang suddenly out of my control. And a telephone pole, foam white, came crying at me out of the pitch darkness. I heard screams and then a heavy, roaring, tearing sound. Then everything turned absolutely scarlet, and then as bright as day, and I went into a darkness I had never known before. I must have begun to wake up as we were being moved to the hospital. I dimly remember movement and voices, but they seemed very far away. They seemed to have nothing to do with me. Then, later, I woke up in a spot which seemed to be the very heart of winter. A high, white ceiling and white walls, and a hard, glacial window, bent, as it seemed, over me. I must have tried to rise, for I remember an awful roaring in my head, and then a weight on my chest and a huge face over me. And as this weight, this face, began to push me under again, I screamed for my mother. Then it was dark again. When I came to myself at last, my father was standing over my bed. I knew he was there before I saw him, before my eyes focused and I carefully turned my head. When he saw that I was awake, he carefully stepped closer to the bed, motioning to me to be still, and he looked very old. I wanted to cry. For a moment we just stared at each other. "How do you feel?" he whispered finally. It was when I tried to speak that I realized I was in pain, and immediately I was frightened. He must have seen this in my eyes, for he said in a low voice, with a pained, a marvelous intensity, "Don't worry, David. You're going to be all right. You're going to be all right." I still could not say anything. I simply watched his face. "You kids were mighty lucky," he said, trying to smile. "You're the one got smashed up the most." "I was drunk," I said at last. I wanted to tell him everything, but speaking was such agony. "Don't you know?" he asked with an air of extreme bafflement, for this was something he could allow himself to be baffled about. Better than to go driving around like that when you're drunk? You know better than that, he said severely, and pursed his lips. Why, you could all have been killed. And his voice shook. I'm sorry, I said suddenly. I'm sorry. I did not know how to say what it was I was sorry for. Don't be sorry, he said. Just be careful next time. He had been patting his handkerchief between his palms. Now he opened his handkerchief and reached out and wiped my forehead. You're all I've got, he said then with a shy, pained grin. Be careful. Daddy, I said, and began to cry. And if speaking had been agony, this was worse, and yet I could not stop. And my father's face changed. It became terribly old and at the same time absolutely helplessly young. I remember being absolutely astonished at the still, cold center of the storm which was occurring in me, to realize that my father had been suffering, was suffering still. Don't cry, he said. Don't cry. He stroked my forehead with that absurd handkerchief as though it possessed some healing charm. There's nothing to cry about. Everything's going to be all right. He was almost weeping himself. There's nothing wrong, is there? I haven't done anything wrong, have I? And all the time he was stroking my face with that handkerchief, smothering me. We were drunk, I said. We were drunk. For this seemed somehow to explain everything. Your Aunt Ellen says it's my fault, he said. She says I never raised you right. He put away, thank heaven, that handkerchief and weakly straightened his shoulders. You got nothing against me, have you? Tell me if you have. My tears began to dry on my face and in my breast. No, I said. No, nothing. Honest. I did the best I could, he said. I really did the best I could. I looked at him, and at last he grinned and said, You're going to be on your back for a while, but when you come home, while you're lying around the house, we'll talk. Huh? And when you come home while you're lying around the house, we'll talk. Huh? And try to figure out what the hell we're going to do with you when you get on your feet. Okay? Okay, I said, for I understood, at the bottom of my heart, that we had never talked, that now we never would. I understood that he must never know this. When I came home, he talked with me about my future, but I had made up my mind. I was not going to go to college. I was not going to remain in that house with him and Ellen. And I maneuvered my father so well that he actually began to believe that my finding a job and being on my own was the direct result of his advice and a tribute to the way he had raised me. Once I was out of the house, of course, it became much easier to deal with him, and he never had any reason to feel shut out of my life, for I was always able, when talking about it, to tell him what he wished to hear. And we got on quite well, really, for the vision I gave my father of my life was exactly the vision in which I myself most desperately needed to believe. For I was, one of those people who pride themselves on their willpower, on their ability to make a decision and carry it through. This virtue, like most virtues, is ambiguity itself. People who believe that they are strong-willed and the masters of their destiny can only continue to believe this by becoming specialists in self-deception. Their decisions are not really decisions at all. A real decision makes one humble. One knows that it is at the mercy of more things than can be named, but elaborate systems of evasion, of illusion, designed to make themselves and the world appear to be what they and the world are not. This is certainly what my decision, made so long ago in Joey's bed, came to. I had decided to allow no room in the universe for something which shamed and frightened me. I succeeded very well by not looking at the universe, by not looking at myself, by remaining, in effect, in constant motion. Even constant motion, of course, does not prevent on occasional mysterious drag, a drop, like an airplane hitting an air pocket. And there were a number of those, all drunken, all sordid. One very frightening such drop while I was in the army, which involved a fairy who was later court-martialed out. The panic his punishment caused in me was as close as I ever came to facing in myself the terrors I sometimes saw clouding another man's eyes. What happened was that, all unconscious of what this ennui meant, I wearied of the motion, wearied of the joyless seas of alcohol, wearied of the blunt, bluff, hearty, and totally meaningless friendships, wearied of wandering through the forests of desperate women, wearied of the work, which fed me only in the most brutally literal sense. Perhaps, as we say in America, I wanted to find, in the most brutally literal sense, Perhaps, as we say in America, I wanted to find myself. This is an interesting phase, not current as far as I know in the language of any other people, which certainly does not mean what it says but betrays a nagging suspicion that something has been misplaced. I think now that if I had had any intimation that the self I was going to find would turn out to be only the same self from which I had spent so much time in flight, I would have stayed at home. But, again, I think I knew, at the very bottom of my heart, exactly what I was doing when I took the boat for France. Chapter 2. I met Giovanni during my second year in Paris, when I had no money. On the morning of the evening that we met, I had been turned out of my room. I did not owe an awful lot of money, only around 6,000 francs, but Parisian hotel keepers have a way of smelling poverty, and then they do what anybody does who is aware of a bad smell. They throw whatever stinks outside. My father had money in his account which belonged to me, but he was very reluctant to send it because he wanted me to come home, as he said, and settle down, and whenever he said that I thought of the sediment at the bottom of a stagnant pond. I did not, then, know many people in Paris, and Hella was in Spain. Most of the people I knew in Paris were, as Parisians sometimes put it, of le milieu, and, while this milieu was certainly anxious enough to claim me, I was intent on proving, to them and to myself, that I was not of their company. I did this by being in their company a great deal and manifesting toward all of them a tolerance which placed me, I believed, above suspicion. I had written to friends for money, of course, but the Atlantic Ocean is deep and wide and money doesn't hurry from the other side. So I went through my address book, sitting over a tepid coffee in a boulevard cafe, and decided to call up an old acquaintance who was always asking me to call. An aging, Belgian-born, American businessman named Jacques. He had a big, comfortable apartment and lots of things to drink and lots of money. He was, as I knew he would be, surprised to hear from me, and before the surprise and the charm wore off, giving him time to become wary, he had invited me for supper. He may have been cursing as he hung up and reaching for his wallet, but it was too late. Jacques is not too bad. Perhaps he is a fool and a coward, but almost everybody is one or the other, and most people are both. In some ways I liked him. He was silly, but he was so lonely. Anyway, I understand now that the contempt I felt for him involved my self-contempt. He could be unbelievably generous. He could be unspeakably stingy. Though he wanted to trust everybody, he was incapable of trusting a living soul. To make up for this, he threw his money away on people. Inevitably, then, he was abused. Then he buttoned his wallet, locked his door, and retired into that strong self-pity which was, perhaps, the only thing he had which really belonged to him. I thought for a long while that he, with his big apartment, his well-meant promises, his whiskey, his marijuana, his orgies, had helped to kill Giovanni. As, indeed, perhaps he had. But Jacques' hands are certainly no bloodier than mine. I saw Jacques, as a matter of fact, just after Giovanni was sentenced. He was sitting bundled up in his greatcoat on the terrace of a cafe, drinking a vin chaud. He was alone on the terrace. He called me as I passed. He did not look well. His face was mottled. His eyes, behind his glasses, were like the eyes of a dying man who looks everywhere for healing. "You've heard," he whispered, as I joined him. "About Giovanni?" I nodded yes. I remember the winter sun was shining and I felt as cold and distant as the sun. "It's terrible, terrible, terrible," Jacques moaned. "Terrible." "Yes," I said. I could not say anything more. "I wonder why he did it," Jacques pursued. "Why he didn't ask his friends to help him." He looked at me. We both knew that the last time Giovanni had asked Jacques for money, Jacques had refused. I said nothing. "They say he had started taking opium," Jacques said. "That he needed the money for opium. Did you hear that?" I had heard it. It was a newspaper speculation which, however, I had reasons of my own for believing, remembering the extent of Giovanni's desperation, knowing how far this terror, which was so vast that it had simply become a void, had driven him. "Me, I want to escape," he had told me. "Je veux m'évader. This dirty world, this dirty body. I never wished to make love again with anything more than the body." Jacques waited for me to answer. I stared out into the street. I was beginning to think of Giovanni dying. Where Giovanni had been, there would be nothing, nothing forever. "I hope it's not my fault," Jacques said at last. "One didn't give him the money." If I'd known, I would have given him everything I had. But we both knew this was not true. You two together, Jacques suggested. You weren't happy together? No, I said. I stood up. It might have been better, I said, if he'd stayed down there in that village of his in Italy and planted his olive trees and had a lot of children and beaten his wife. He used to love to sing. I remembered suddenly. Maybe he could have stayed down there and sung his life away and died in bed. Then Jacques said something that surprised me. People are full of surprises, even for themselves, if they have been stirred enough. Nobody can stay in the Garden of Eden, Jacques said. And then, I wonder why. I said nothing. I said goodbye and left him. Hella had long since returned from Spain, and we were already arranging to rent this house, and I had a date to meet her. I have thought about Jacques' question since. The question is banal, but one of the real troubles with living is that living is so banal. Everyone, after all, goes the same dark road, and the road has a trick of being most dark, most treacherous, when it seems most bright, and it's true that nobody stays in the Garden of Eden. Jacques' garden was not the same as Giovanni's, of course. Jacques' garden was involved with football players and Giovanni's was involved with maidens, but that seems to have made so little difference. Perhaps everybody has a Garden of Eden, I don't know. But they have scarcely seen their garden before they see the flaming sword. Then, perhaps, life only offers the choice of remembering the garden or forgetting it. Either or, it takes strength to remember, it takes another kind of strength to forget, it takes a hero to do both. People who remember court madness through pain, the pain of the perpetually recurring death of their innocence. People who forget court another kind of madness, the madness of the denial of pain and the hatred of innocence. And the world is mostly divided between madmen who remember and madmen who forget. Heroes are rare. Jacques had not wanted to have supper in his apartment because his cook had run away. His cooks were always running away. He was always getting young boys from the provinces, God knows how, to come up and be cooks. And they, of course, as soon as they were able to find their way around the capital, decided that cooking was the last thing they wanted to do. They usually ended up going back to the provinces, those, that is, who did not end up on the streets or in jail or in Indochina. I met him at a rather nice restaurant on the Rue de Grenelle and arranged to borrow 10,000 francs from him before we had finished our aperitifs. He was in a good mood and I, of course, was in a good mood too, and this meant that we would end up drinking in Jacques' favorite bar, a noisy, crowded, ill-fit sort of tunnel of dubious or perhaps not dubious at all of rather too emphatic reputation. Every once in a while it was raided by the police, apparently with the connivance of Guillaume, the patron, who always managed, on the particular evening, to warn his favorite customers that if they were not armed with identification papers they might be better off elsewhere. I remember that the bar, that night, was more than ordinarily crowded and noisy. All of the habitués were there and many strangers, some looking, some just staring. There were 3 or 4 very chic Parisian ladies sitting at a table with their gigolos or their lovers or perhaps simply their country cousins. God knows. The ladies seemed extremely animated. Their males seemed rather stiff. The ladies seemed to be doing most of the drinking. There were the usual paunchy, bespectacled gentlemen with avid, sometimes despairing eyes, the usual knife-blade lean, tight-trousered boys. One could never be sure, as concerns these latter, whether they were after money or blood or love. They moved about the bar incessantly, cadging cigarettes and drinks, with something behind their eyes at once terribly vulnerable and terribly hard. There were, of course, Les Falls, always dressed in the most improbable combinations, screaming like parrots the details of their latest love affairs. Their love affairs always seemed to be hilarious. Occasionally one would swoop in, quite late in the evening, to convey the news that he, but they always called each other she, had just spent time with a celebrated movie star or boxer. Then all of the others closed in on this newcomer and they looked like a peacock garden and sounded like a barnyard. I always found it difficult to believe that they ever went to bed with anybody, for a man who wanted a woman would certainly have rather had a real one, and a man who wanted a man would certainly not want one of them. Perhaps, indeed, that was why they screamed so loud. There was the boy who worked all day, it was said, in the post office, who came out at night wearing makeup and earrings and with his heavy blonde hair piled high. Sometimes he actually wore a skirt and high heels. He usually stood alone unless Guillaume walked over to tease him. People said that he was very nice, but I confess that his utter grotesqueness made me uneasy. perhaps in the same way that the sight of monkeys eating their own excrement turns some people's stomachs. They might not mind so much if monkeys did not, so grotesquely, resemble human beings. This bar was practically in my quartier, and I had many times had breakfast in the nearby workingman's cafe to which all the nightbirds of the neighborhood retired when the bars closed. Sometimes I was with Hella. Sometimes I was alone. And I had been in this bar two or three times. Once very drunk, I had been accused of causing a minor sensation by flirting with a soldier. My memory of that night was happily very dim, and I took the attitude that no matter how drunk I may have been, I could not possibly have done such a thing. But my face was known, and I had the feeling that people were taking bets about me. Or, it was as though they were the elders of some strange and austere holy order and were watching me in order to discover, by means of signs I made but which only they could read, whether or not I had a true vocation. Jacques was aware, I was aware, as we pushed our way to the bar. It was like moving into the field of a magnet or like approaching a small circle of heat, of the presence of a new barman. He stood, insolent and dark and leonine, his elbow leaning on the cash register, his fingers playing with his chin, looking out at the crowd. It was as though his station were a promontory and we were the sea. Jacques was immediately attracted. I felt him, so to speak, preparing himself for conquest. I felt the necessity for tolerance. "I'm sure," I said, "that you'll want to get to know the barman, so I'll vanish any time you like." There was, in this tolerance of mind, a fund by no means meager of malicious knowledge. I had drawn on it when I called him up to borrow money. I knew that Jacques could only hope to conquer the boy before us if the boy was, in effect, for sale, and if he stood with such arrogance on an auction block, he could certainly find bidders richer and more attractive than Jacques. I knew that Jacques knew this. I knew something else. That Jacques' vaunted affection for me was involved with desire, the desire, in fact, to be rid of me, to be able soon to despise me as he now despised that army of boys who had come, without love, to his bed. I held my own against this desire by pretending that Jacques and I were friends, by forcing Jacques, on pain of humiliation, to pretend this. I pretended not to see, although I exploited it, the lust not quite sleeping in his bright, bitter eyes, and, by means of the rough, male candor with which I conveyed to him his case was hopeless, I compelled him endlessly to hope. And I knew, finally, that in bars such as these I was Jacques' protection. As long as I was there, the world could see and he could believe that he was out with me, his friend. He was not there out of desperation. He was not at the mercy of whatever adventure, chance, cruelty, or the laws of actual and emotional poverty might throw his way. "You stay right here," said Jacques. "I'll look at him from time to time and talk to you, and that way I'll save money. And stay happy, too." "I wonder where Guillaume found him," I said. For he was so exactly the kind of boy that Guillaume always dreamed of that it scarcely seemed possible that Guillaume could have found him. "What will you have?" he now asked us. His tone conveyed that, though he spoke no English, he knew that we had been speaking about him and hoped we were through. "Un fine à l'eau," I said, and "un cognac," said Jacques, both speaking too quickly, so that I blushed and realized by a faint merriment on Giovanni's face as he served us that he had seen it. Jacques, willfully misinterpreting Giovanni's nuance of a smile, made of it an opportunity. "You're new here?" he asked in English. Giovanni almost certainly understood the question, but it suited him better to look blankly from Jacques to me and then back again at Jacques. Jacques translated his question. Giovanni shrugged. "I have been here a month," he said. I knew where the conversation was going, and I kept my eyes down and sipped my drink. "It must," Jacques suggested, with a sort of bludgeoning insistence on the light touch, "seem very strange to you." "Strange?" asked Giovanni. "Why?" And Jacques giggled. I was suddenly ashamed that I was with him. These men. And I knew that voice, breathless, insinuating, high as no girl's had ever been, and hot, suggesting, somehow, the absolutely motionless, deadly heat which hangs over swamp ground in July. "All these men," he gasped, "and so few women. Doesn't that seem strange to you?" "Ah," said Giovanni, and turned away to serve another customer. "Ho doubt the women are waiting at home." "I'm sure one's waiting for you," insisted Jacques, to which Giovanni did not respond. "Well, That didn't take long, said Jacques, half to me, half to the space which had just held Giovanni. Aren't you glad you stayed? You've got me all to yourself. Oh, you're handling it all wrong, I said. He's mad for you. He just doesn't want to seem too anxious. Order him a drink. Find out where he likes to buy his clothes. Tell him about that cunning little Alfa Romeo you're just dying to give away to some deserving bartender. Very funny, said Jacques. Well, I said, faint heart never won fair athlete, that's for sure. Anyway, I'm sure he sleeps with girls. They always do, you know. I've heard about boys who do that. Nasty little beasts. We stood in silence for a while. Why don't you invite him to have a drink with us? Jacques suggested. I looked at him. Why don't I? Well, you may find this hard to believe, but actually, I'm sort of queer for girls myself. If that was his sister looking so good, I'd invite her to have a drink with us. I don't spend money on men. I could see Jacques struggling not to say that I didn't have any objection to allowing men to spend money on me. I watched his brief struggle with a slight smile, for I knew he couldn't say it. Then he said, with that cheery, brave smile of his, I was not suggesting that you jeopardize, even for a moment, that, he paused, that immaculate manhood which is your pride and joy. I only suggested that you invite him because he will almost certainly refuse if I invite him. But man, I said, grinning, think of the confusion. He'll think that I'm the one who's lusting for his body. How do we get out of that? If there should be any confusion, said Jacques with dignity, I will be happy to clear it up. We measured each other for a moment. Then I laughed. Wait till he comes back this way. I hope he orders a magnum of the most expensive champagne in France. I turned, leaning on the bar. I felt somehow elated. Jacques, beside me, was very quiet, suddenly very frail and old, and I felt a quick, sharp, rather frightened pity for him. Giovanni had been out on the floor, serving the people at tables, and he now returned with a rather grim smile on his face, carrying a loaded tray. Maybe, I said, it would look better if our glasses were empty. We finished our drinks. I set down my glass. Barman, I called. The same. Yes. He started to turn away. Barman, I said quickly, we would like to offer you a drink if we may. Bien, said a voice behind us. C'est fort ca. Not only have you finally, thank heaven, corrupted this great American football player, you use him now to corrupt my barman. Vraiment, Jacques, at your age. It was Guillaume standing behind us, grinning like a movie star and waving that long white handkerchief which he was never, in the bar at any rate, to be seen without. Jacques turned, hugely delighted to be accused of such rare seductiveness, and he and Guillaume fell into each other's arms like old theatrical sisters. Eh bien, ma chérie, comment vas-tu? I have not seen you for a long time, but I have been awfully busy, said Jacques. I don't doubt it. Aren't you ashamed? Vieille folle? Et toi? You certainly don't seem to have been wasting your time. And Jacques threw a delighted look in the direction of Giovanni, rather as though Giovanni were a valuable racehorse or a rare bit of china. Guillaume followed the look and his voice dropped. Ah, c'est, mon cher, c'est strictement du business, comprends-tu? They moved a little away. This left me surrounded, abruptly, with an awful silence. At last I raised my eyes and looked at Giovanni, who was watching me. I think you offered me a drink, he said. Yes, I said. I offered you a drink. I drink no alcohol while I work, but I will take a Coca-Cola. He picked up my glass. And for you, it is the same? The same. I realized that I was quite happy to be talking with him, and this realization made me shy. And I felt menaced since Jacques was no longer at my side. Then I realized that I would have to pay, for this round anyway. It was impossible to tug Jacques' sleeve for the money as though I were his ward. I coughed and put my 10,000 franc note on the bar. You are rich, said Giovanni, and set my drink before me. But no, I simply have no change. He grinned. I could not tell whether he grinned because he thought I was lying or because he knew I was telling the truth. In silence, he took the bill and rang it up and carefully counted out my change on the bar before me. Then he filled his glass and went back to his original position at the cash register. I felt a tightening in my chest. Allah Vatri, he said. Allah Vatri. We drank. You are an American? He asked at last. Yes, I said. From New York. Ah, I am told that New York is very beautiful. Is it more beautiful than Paris? Oh no, I said. No city is more beautiful than Paris. It seems the very suggestion that one could be is enough to make you very angry, grinned Giovanni. Forgive me. I was not trying to be heretical. Then, more soberly and as though to appease me, two must like Paris very much. I like New York too, I said, uncomfortably aware that my voice had a defensive ring. But New York is very beautiful in a very different way. Defensive ring, but New York is very beautiful in a very different way. He frowned. In what way? No one, I said, who has never seen it can possibly imagine it. It's very high and new and electric. Exciting. I paused. It's hard to describe. His smile made me feel a little foolish. Well, I said, Paris is old, is many centuries. You feel in Paris all the time gone by. That isn't what you feel in New York. He was smiling. I stopped. What do you feel in New York? He asked. Perhaps you feel, I told him, all the time to come. There's such power there. Everything is in such movement. You can't help wondering. I can't help wondering what it will all be like many years from now. Many years from now? When we are dead and New York is old. Yes, I said. When everyone is tired, when the world, for Americans, is not so new. I don't see why the world is so new for Americans, said Giovanni. After all, you are all merely emigrants. And you did not leave Europe so very long ago. The ocean is very wide, I said. We have led different lives than you. Things have happened to us there which have never happened here. Surely you can understand that this would make us a different people. Ah, if it had only made you a different people 1 foot, he laughed. But it seems to have turned you into another species. You are not, are you, on another planet? For I suppose that would explain everything. I admit, I said with some heat, for I do not like to be laughed at, that we may sometimes give the impression that we think we are, but we are not on another planet, no. And neither, my friend, are you. He grinned again. I will not, he said, argue that most unlucky fact. We were silent for a moment. Giovanni moved to serve several people at either end of the bar. Guillaume and Jacques were still talking. Guillaume seemed to be recounting one of his interminable anecdotes which invariably pivoted on the hazards of business or the hazards of love, and Jacques' mouth was stretched in a rather painful grin. I knew that he was dying to get back to the bar. Giovanni placed himself before me again and began wiping the bar with a damp cloth. The Americans are funny. You have a funny sense of time, or perhaps you have no sense of time at all, I can't tell. Time always sounds like a parade chez vous, a triumphant parade, like armies with banners entering a town. As though, with enough time, and that would not need to be so very much for Americans and a pas. And he smiled, giving me a mocking look, but I said nothing. Well then, he continued. As though with enough time and all that fearful energy and virtue you people have, everything will be settled, solved, put in its place. And when I say everything, he added grimly, I mean all the serious, dreadful things, like pain and death and love, in which you Americans do not believe. What makes you think we don't? And what do you believe? I don't believe in this nonsense about time. Time is just common, it's like water for a fish. Everybody's in this water, nobody gets out of it, or if he does the same thing happens to him that happens to the fish, he dies. And you know what happens in this water, time? The big fish eat the little fish. That's all. The big fish eat the little fish and the ocean doesn't care. Oh, please, I said. I don't believe that. Time's hot water and we're not fish and you can choose to be eaten and also not to eat. Not to eat, I added quickly, turning a little red before his delighted and sardonic smile. The little fish, of course. To choose, cried Giovanni, turning his face away from me and speaking, it appeared, to an invisible ally who had been eavesdropping on this conversation all along. To choose. He turned to me again. Ah, you are really an American. J'adore votre enthusiasm. I adore yours, I said politely, though it seems to be a blacker brand than mine. Anyway, he said mildly, I don't see what you can do with little fish except eat them. What else are they good for? In my country, I said, feeling a subtle war within me as I said it. The little fish seem to have gotten together and are nibbling at the body of the whale. That will not make them whales, said Giovanni. The only result of all that nibbling will be that there will no longer be any grandeur anywhere, not even at the bottom of the sea. Is that what you have against us? That we're not grand? He smiled like someone who, faced with the total inadequacy of the opposition, is prepared to drop the argument. Peut-être. You people are impossible, I said. You're the ones who killed grandeur off, right here in this city with paving stones. Talk about little fish. He was grinning. I stopped. Don't stop, he said, still grinning. I am listening. Don't stop, he said, still grinning. I am listening. I finished my drink. You people dumped all this murd on us, I said sullenly. And now you say we're barbaric because we stink. My sullenness delighted him. You're charming, he said. Do you always speak like this? No, I said and looked down. Almost never. There was something in him of the coquette. I am flattered then, he said, with a sudden, disconcerting gravity, which contained, nevertheless, the very faintest hint of mockery. And you, I said finally, have you been here long? Do you like Paris? He hesitated a moment and then grinned, suddenly looking rather boyish and shy. It's cold in the winter, he said. I don't like that. And Parisians? I do not find them so very friendly, do you? He did not wait for my answer. They are not like the people I knew when I was younger. In Italy we are friendly, we dance and sing and make love. But these people, and he looked out over the bar, and then at me and finished his Coca-Cola. These people, they are cold, I do not understand them. But the French say, I teased, that the Italians are too fluid, too volatile, have no sense of measure. Measure, cried Giovanni. Ah, these people and their measure. They measure the gram, the centimeter, these people, and they keep piling all the little scraps they save, one on top of the other, year in and year out, all in the stocking or under the bed. And what do they get out of all this measure? A country which is falling to pieces, measure by measure, before their eyes. Measure. I do not like to offend your ears by saying all the things I am sure these people measure before they permit themselves any act whatever. May I offer you a drink now? He asked suddenly. Before the old man comes back? Who is he? Is he your uncle? I did not know whether the word uncle was being used euphemistically or not. I felt a very urgent desire to make my position clear, but I did not know how to go about it. I laughed. No, I said, Lai is not my uncle. He is just somebody I know. Giovanni looked at me, and this look made me feel that no one in my life had ever looked at me directly before. One hope he is not very dear to you, he said with a smile, because I think he is silly. Not a bad man, you understand, just a little silly. Perhaps, I said, and at once felt like a traitor. He's not bad, I added quickly. He's really a pretty nice guy. That's not true either. I thought he's far from being a nice guy. Anyway, I said, he's certainly not very dear to me, and, from being a nice guy. Anyway, I said, he's certainly not very dear to me, and felt again at once this strange tightening in my chest and wondered at the sound of my voice. Carefully now, Giovanni poured my drink. Vive l'Amérique, he said. Thank you, I said, and lifted my glass. Vive le vieux continent. We were silent for a moment. Do you come in here often? Asked Giovanni suddenly. No, I said, not very often. But you will come, he teased, with a wonderful, mocking light on his face. More often now? I stammered. Why? Ah, cried Giovanni. Don't you know when you have made a friend? I knew I must look foolish and that my question was foolish too. So soon? Why no, he said reasonably and looked at his watch. We can wait another hour if you like. We can become friends then. Or we can wait until closing time. We can become friends then. Or we can wait until tomorrow. Only that means that you must come in here tomorrow and perhaps you have something else to do. He put his watch away and leaned both elbows on the bar. Tell me, he said, what is this thing about time? Why is it better to be late than early? People are always saying, we must wait, we must wait. What are they waiting for? Well, I said, feeling myself being led by Giovanni into deep and dangerous water. I guess people wait in order to make sure of what they feel. In order to make sure. He turned again to that invisible ally and laughed again. I was beginning, perhaps, to find his phantom a little unnerving, but the sound of his laughter in that airless tunnel was the most incredible sound. It's clear that you are a true philosopher. He pointed a finger at my heart. And when you have waited, has it made you sure? For this I could simply summon no answer. From the dark, crowded center of the bar someone called, Garçon. And he moved away from me, smiling. You can wait now. And tell me how sure you have become when I return. And he took his round metal tray and moved out into the crowd. I watched him as he moved. And then I watched their faces watching him. And then I was afraid. I knew that they were watching, had been watching both of us. They knew that they had witnessed a beginning and now they would not cease to watch until they saw the end. It had taken some time, but the tables had been turned. Now I was in the zoo and they were watching. I stood at the bar for quite a while alone. For Jacques had escaped from Guillaume but was now involved, poor man, with two of the knife blade boys. Guillaume but was now involved, poor man, with two of the knife blade boys. Giovanni came back for an instant and winked. Are you sure? You win. You're the philosopher. Oh, you must wait some more. You do not yet know me well enough to say such a thing. And he filled his tray and disappeared again. Now someone whom I had never seen before came out of the shadows toward me. It looked like a mummy or a zombie. This was the first, overwhelming impression of something walking after it had been put to death. And it walked, really, like someone who might be sleepwalking or like those figures in slow motion one sometimes sees on the screen. It carried a glass. It walked on its toes. The flat hips moved with a dead, horrifying lasciviousness. It seemed to make no sound. This was due to the roar of the bar, which was like the roaring of the sea, heard at night from far away. It glittered in the dim fight. The thin, black hair was violent with oil, combed forward, hanging in bangs. The eyelids gleamed with mascara, the mouth raged with lipstick. The face was white and thoroughly bloodless with some kind of foundation cream. It stank of powder and a gardenia-like perfume. The shirt, open coquettishly to the navel, revealed a hairless chest and a silver crucifix. The shirt was covered with round, paper-thin wafers, red and green and orange and yellow and blue, which stormed in the light and made one feel that the mummy might, at any moment, disappear in flame. A red sash was around the waist. The clinging pants were a surprisingly somber gray. He wore buckles on his shoes. I was not sure that he was coming towards me, but I could not take my eyes away. He stopped before me, one hand on his hip, looked me up and down and smiled. He had been eating garlic and his teeth were very bad. His hands, I noticed with an unbelieving shock, were very large and strong. Eh bien, he said. ILT plate? Comment, I said. I really was not sure I had heard him right, though the bright, bright eyes, looking, it seemed, at something amusing within the recess of my skull, did not leave much room for doubt. You like him, the barman? I did not know what to do or say. It seemed impossible to hit him. It seemed impossible to get angry. It did not seem real, he did not seem real. Besides, no matter what I said, those eyes would mock me with it. I said, as drilly as I could, how does that concern you? But it concerns me not at all, darling. J menfo. Then please get the hell away from me. He did not move at once, but smiled at me again. Ils dangereux, tu sais, and for a boy like you, he is very dangerous. I looked at him. I almost asked him what he meant. Go to hell, I said, and turned my back. Oh no, he said, and I looked at him again. He was laughing, showing all his teeth. There were not many. Oh no, he said, I go not to hell. And he clutched his crucifix with one large hand. But you, my dear friend, I fear that you shall burn in a very hot fire. He laughed again. Oh, such fire! He touched his head. Here, and he writhed, as though in torment. Everywhere, and he touched his heart. And here, and he looked at me with malice and mockery and something else. He looked at me as though I were very far away. Oh, my poor friend, so young, so strong, so handsome. Will you not buy me a drink? Vieti faire fautre. His face crumpled in the sorrow of infants and of very old men, the sorrow also of certain aging actresses who were renowned in their youth for their fragile, childlike beauty. The dark eyes narrowed in spite and fury, and the scarlet mouth turned down like the mask of tragedy. Tora du chagrin, he said. You will be very unhappy. Remember that I told you so. And he straightened, as though he were a princess, and moved, flaming, away through the crowd. Then Jacques spoke at my elbow. Everyone in the bar, he said, is talking about how beautifully you and the barman have hit it off. He gave me a radiant and vindictive smile. I trust there has been no confusion? I looked down at him. I wanted to do something to his cheerful, hideous, worldly face which would make it impossible for him ever again to smile at anyone the way he was smiling at me. Then I wanted to get out of this bar, out into the air, perhaps to find Hella, my suddenly so sorely menaced girl. There's been no confusion, I snapped. Don't you go getting confused, either. I think I can safely say, said Jacques, that I have scarcely ever been less confused than I am at this moment. He had stopped smiling. He gave me a look which was dry, bitter, and impersonal. And, at the risk of losing forever your so remarkably candid friendship, let me tell you something. Confusion is a luxury which only the very, very young can possibly afford, and you are not that young anymore. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Let's have another drink. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Let's have another drink. I felt that I had better get drunk. Now Giovanni went behind the bar again and winked at me. Jacques' eyes never left my face. I turned rudely from him and faced the bar again. He followed me. The same, said Jacques. Certainly, said Giovanni. That's the way to do it. He fixed our drinks. Jacques paid. I suppose I did not look too well, for Giovanni shouted at me playfully. Eh? Are you drunk already? I looked up and smiled. To know how Americans drink, I said. One haven't even started yet. David is far from drunk, said Jacques. He is only reflecting bitterly that he must get a new pair of suspenders. I could have killed Jacques. Yet it was only with difficulty that I kept myself from laughing. I made a face to signify to Giovanni that the old man was making a private joke, and he disappeared again. That time of evening had come when great batches of people were leaving and great batches were coming in. They would all encounter each other later anyway, in the last bar, all those, that is, unlucky enough to be searching still at such an advanced hour. I could not look at Jacques, which he knew. He stood beside me, surniling at nothing, humming a tune. There was nothing I could say. I did not dare to mention Hella. I could not even pretend to myself that I was sorry she was in Spain. I was glad. I was utterly, hopelessly, horribly glad. I knew I could do nothing whatever to stop the ferocious excitement which had burst in me like a storm. I could only drink, in the faint hope that the storm might thus spend itself without doing any more damage to my land. But I was glad. I was only sorry that Jacques had been a witness. He made me ashamed. I hated him because he had now seen all that he had waited, often scarcely hoping, so many months to see. We had, in effect, been playing a deadly game, and he was the winner. He was the winner in spite of the fact that I had cheated to win. I wished, nevertheless, standing there at the bar, that I had been able to find in myself the force to turn and walk out, to have gone over to Montparnasse perhaps and picked up a girl. Any girl. I could not do it. I told myself all sorts of lies, standing there at the bar, but I could not move. And this was partly because I knew that it did not really matter anymore. It did not even matter if I never spoke to Giovanni again, for they had become visible as the wafers on the shirt of the flaming princess. They stormed all over me, my awakening, my insistent possibilities. That was how I met Giovanni. I think we connected the instant that we met. and remain connected still, in spite of our later separation to core, despite the fact that Giovanni will be rotting soon in unhallowed ground near Paris. Until I die, there will be those moments seeming to rise up out of the ground like Macbeth's witches, when his face will come before me, that face in all its changes, when the exact timbre of his voice and tricks of his speech will nearly burst my ears, when his smell will overpower my nostrils. Sometimes, in the days which are coming, God grant me the grace to live them. In the glare of the gray morning, sour-mouthed, eyelids raw and red, hair tangled and damp from my stormy sleep, facing, over coffee and cigarette smoke, last night's impenetrable, meaningless boy who will shortly rise and vanish like the smoke. I will see Giovanni again, as he was that night, so vivid, so winning, all of the light of that gloomy tunnel trapped around his head. Chapter 3. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Guillaume locked the door of the bar behind us. The streets were empty and gray. On a corner near the bar, a butcher had already opened his shop, and one could see him within, already bloody, hacking at the meat. One of the great, green Paris buses lumbered past, nearly empty, its bright electric flag waving fiercely to indicate a turn. A garçon de café spilled water on the sidewalk before his establishment and swept it into the gutter. At the end of the long, curving street which faced us were the trees of the boulevard and straw chairs piled high before cafés and the great stone spire of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the most magnificent spire, as Hella and I believed, in Paris. The street beyond the place stretched before us to the river and, hidden beside and behind us, meandered to Montparnasse. It was named for an adventurer who sowed a crop in Europe which is being harvested until today. I had often walked the street, sometimes with Hella, towards the river, often, without her, towards the girls of Montparnasse. Not very long ago either, though it seemed that morning to have occurred in another life. We were going to Les Halles for breakfast. We piled into a taxi, the four of us unpleasantly crowded together, a circumstance which elicited from Jacques and Guillaume a series of lewd speculations. This lewdness was particularly revolting in that it not only failed of wit, it was so clearly an expression of contempt and self-contempt. It bubbled upward out of them like a fountain of black water. It was clear that they were tantalizing themselves with Giovanni and me, and this set my teeth on edge. But Giovanni leaned back against the taxi window, allowing his arm to press my shoulder lightly, seeming to say that we should soon be rid of these old men and should not be distressed that their dirty water splashed. We would have no trouble washing it away. "Look," said Giovanni as we crossed the river. "This old whore, Paris, as she turns in bed, is very moving." I looked out, beyond his heavy profile, which was gray, from fatigue and from the light of the sky above us. The river was swollen and yellow. Nothing moved on the river. Barges were tied up along the banks. The island of the city widened away from us, bearing the weight of the cathedral. Beyond this, dimly, through speed and mist, one made out the individual roofs of Paris, their myriad, squat chimney stacks very beautiful and varicolored under the pearly sky. Mist clung to the river, softening that army of trees, softening those stones, hiding the city's dreadful corkscrew alleys and dead-end streets, clinging like a curse to the men who slept beneath the bridges. One of whom flashed by beneath us, very black and lone, walking along the river. "Some rats have gone in," said Giovanni, "and now other rats come out." He smiled bleakly and looked at me. To my surprise, he took my hand and held it. "Have you ever slept under a bridge?" he asked. "Or perhaps they have soft beds with warm blankets under the bridges in your country?" I did not know what to do about my hand. It seemed better to do nothing. "Not yet," I said. "But I may. My hotel wants to throw me out." I had said it lightly, with a smile, out of a desire to put myself, in terms of an acquaintance with wintry things, on an equal footing with him. But the fact that I had said it as he held my hand made it sound to me unutterably helpless and soft and coy. But I could not say anything to counteract this impression. To say anything more would confirm it. I pulled my hand away, pretending that I had done so in order to search for a cigarette. Jacques lit it for me. "Where do you live?" he asked Giovanni. "Oh," said Giovanni, "out, far out. It is almost not Paris." "He lives in a dreadful street, near Nation," said Guillaume. among all the dreadful bourgeoisie and their pig-like children. You failed to catch the children at the right age, said Jacques. They go through a period all too brief, Hellas, when a pig is perhaps the only animal they do not call to mind. And, again to Giovanni, in a hotel? No, said Giovanni, and for the first time he seemed slightly uncomfortable. I live in a maid's room. With the maid. No, said Giovanni and smiled. The maid is I don't know where. You could certainly tell that there was no maid if you ever saw my room. I would love to, said Jacques. Then we will give a party for you one day, said Giovanni. This, too courteous and too bald to permit any further questioning. Nearly forced, nevertheless, a question from my UPS. Guillaume looked briefly at Giovanni, who did not look at him but out into the morning, whistling. I had been making resolutions for the last 6 hours, and now I made another one. To have this whole thing off with Giovanni as soon as I got him alone at Les Halles. I was going to have to tell him that he had made a mistake, but that we... Halles. I was going to have to tell him that he had made a mistake, but that we could still be friends. But I could not be certain, really, that it might not be I who was making a mistake, blindly misreading everything, and out of necessities, then too shameful to be uttered. I was in a box, for I could see that, no matter how I turned, the hour of confession was upon me and could scarcely be averted. Unless, of course, I leaped out of the cab, which would be the most terrible confession of all. Now the cab driver asked us where we wanted to go, for we had arrived at the choked boulevards and impassable side streets of Les Halles. Leeks, onions, cabbages, oranges, apples, potatoes, cauliflowers stood gleaming in mounds all over, on the sidewalks, in the streets, before great metal sheds. The sheds were blocks long, and within the sheds were piled more fruit, more vegetables, in some sheds fish, in some sheds cheese, in some whole animals lately slaughtered. It scarcely seemed possible that all of this could ever be eaten. But in a few hours it would all be gone, and trucks would be arriving from all corners of France, and making their way, to the great profit of a beehive of middlemen, across the city of Paris, to feed the roaring multitude, who were roaring now, at once wounding and charming the ear, before and behind, and on either side of our taxi. Our taxi driver and Giovanni too roared back. The multitude of Paris seems to be dressed in blue every day but Sunday, when, for the most part, they put on an unbelievably festive black. Here they were now, in blue, disputing every inch our passage with their wagons, hand trucks, camions, their bursting baskets carried at an angle, steeply self-confident on the back. A red-faced woman, burdened with fruit, shouted to Giovanni, the driver, to the world. A particularly vivid coquetry, to which the driver and Giovanni, at once, at the top of their lungs, responded, though the fruit lady had already passed beyond our sight and perhaps no longer even remembered her precisely obscene conjectures. We crawled along, for no one had yet told the driver where to stop, and Giovanni and the driver, who had, it appeared, immediately upon entering Les Halles, been transformed into brothers, exchanged speculations, unflattering in the extreme, concerning the hygiene, language, private parts, and habits of the citizens of Paris. Jacques and Guillaume were exchanging speculations, unspeakably less good-natured, concerning every passing mail. The pavements were slick with leavings, mainly cast off, rotten leaves, flowers, fruit, and vegetables which had met with disaster, natural and slow, or abrupt. And the walls and corners were combed with pissoirs, dull-burning, makeshift braziers, cafes, restaurants, and smoky yellow bistros. Of these last, some so small that they were little more than diamond-shaped, enclosed corners holding bottles, and a zinc-covered counter. Nothing here reminded me of home, though Giovanni reveled in it all. I know a place, he told the driver, Trace Bon Marché, and told the driver where it was. It developed that it was one of the driver's favorite rendezvous. Where is this place? Asked Jacques petulantly. I thought we were going to. And he named another place. You are joking, said Giovanni with contempt. That place is very bad and very expensive. It is only for tourists. We are not tourists, and he added to me, when I first came to Paris I worked in Les Halles a long time too. Nom de Dieu. Quel boulot. I pray always never to do that again. and he regarded the streets through which we passed with a sadness which was not less real for being a little theatrical and self-mocking. Guillaume said, from his corner of the cab, "Tell him who rescued you." "Ah, yes," said Giovanni. "Behold my savior, my patron." He was silent a moment. Then, "Asterisk, you do not regret it, do you? I have not done you any harm? You are pleased with my work?" "Mais oui," said Guillaume. Giovanni sighed. "Bien, sir." He looked out of the window again whistling. We came to a corner remarkably clear. The taxi stopped. "ICI," said the driver. "ICI," Giovanni echoed. I reached for my wallet, but Giovanni sharply caught my hand, conveying to me with an angry flick of his eyelash the intelligence that the least these dirty old men could do was pay. He opened the door and stepped out into the street. Guillaume had not reached for his wallet, and Jacques paid for the cab. "Ugh," said Guillaume, staring at the door of the café before which we stood. "I am sure this place is infested with vermin. Do you want to poison us?" "It's not the outside you're going to eat," said Giovanni. "You are in much more danger of being poisoned in those dreadful, chic places you always go to, where they always have the face clean. Mais, mon Dieu, les fesses." He grinned. "Face-moi confiance. Why would I want to poison you? Then I would have no job, and I have only just found out that I want to live." He and Guillaume, Giovanni still smiling, exchanged a look which I would not have been able to read even if I had dared to try, and Jacques, pushing all of us before him as though we were his chickens, said with that grin, "We can't stand here in the cold and argue. If we can't eat inside, we can drink. Alcohol kills all microbes." And Guillaume brightened suddenly. He was really remarkable, as though he carried, hidden somewhere on his person, a needle filled with vitamins, which automatically, at the blackening hour, discharged itself into his veins. "Ils jeunes de dawn," he said, and we went in. Indeed, there were young people, half a dozen at the zinc counter before glasses of red and white wine, along with others not young at all. A pockmarked boy and a very rough-looking girl were playing the pinball machine near the window. There were a few people sitting at the tables in the back, served by an astonishingly clean-looking waiter. In the gloom, the dirty walls, the sawdust-covered floor, his white jacket gleamed like snow. Behind these tables one caught a glimpse of the kitchen and the surly, obese cook. He lumbered about like one of those overloaded trucks outside, wearing one of those high, white hats, and with a dead cigar stuck between his lips. Behind the counter sat one of those absolutely inimitable and indomitable ladies, produced only in the city of Paris, but produced there in great numbers, who would be as outrageous and unsettling in any other city as a mermaid on a mountaintop. All over Paris they sit behind their counters like a mother bird in a nest and brood over the cash register as though it were an egg. Nothing occurring under the circle of heaven where they sit escapes their eye. If they have ever been surprised by anything, it was only in a dream they long ago ceased having. They are neither ill nor good-natured, though they have their days and styles, and they know, in the way, apparently, that other people know when they have to go to the bathroom, everything about everyone who enters their domain. Though some are white-haired and some not, some fat, some thin, some grandmothers and some but lately virgins, they all have exactly the same shrewd, vacant, all-registering eye. It is difficult to believe that they ever cried for milk or looked at the sun. It seems they must have come into the world hungry for banknotes, and squinting helplessly, unable to focus their eyes until they came to rest on a cash register. This one's hair is black and gray, and she has a face which comes from Brittany. And she, like almost everyone else standing at the bar, knows Giovanni and, after her fashion, likes him. She has a big, deep bosom, and she clasps Giovanni to it, and a big, deep voice. "Ah, mon pote," she cries. "Tu es revenu. You have come back at last. Salad. Now that you are rich and have found rich friends, you never come to see us anymore. Canaille." And she beams at us, the rich friends, with a friendliness deliciously, deliberately vague. She would have no trouble reconstructing every instant of our biographies from the moment we were born until this morning. She knows exactly who is rich and how rich, and she knows it isn't me. For this reason, perhaps, There was a click of speculation infinitesimally double behind her eyes when she looked at me. In a moment, however, she knows that she will understand it all. "You know how it is," says Giovanni, extricating himself and throwing back his hair. Asterisk when you work. When you become serious, you have no time to play. "Tiens," says she with mockery. "Sans blog." "But I assure you," says Giovanni, "even when you are a young man like me, you get very tired." She laughs. "And you go to sleep early." She laughs again. "And alone," says Giovanni, as though this proved everything, and she clicks her teeth in sympathy and laughs again. "And now," she says, "are you coming or going? Have you come for breakfast or have you come for a nightcap? Nom de Dieu, you do not look very serious. I believe you need a drink." "Bien, sir," says someone at the bar. After such hard work, he needs a bottle of white wine, and perhaps a few dozen oysters. Everybody laughs. Everybody, without seeming to, is looking at us, and I am beginning to feel like part of a traveling circus. Everybody also seems very proud of Giovanni. Giovanni turns to the voice at the bar. "An excellent idea, friend," he says, "and exactly what I had in mind." Now he turns to us. "Two have not met my friends," he says, looking at me, then at the woman. "This is Monsieur Guillaume," he tells her, and with the most subtle flattening of his voice, "my patron. He can tell you if I am serious." "Ah," she dares to say, but I cannot tell if he is, and covers this daring with a laugh. Guillaume, raising his eyes with difficulty from the young men at the bar, stretches out his hand and smiles. "But you are right, madam," he says. "He is so much more serious than I am that I fear he will own my bar one day. He will when lions fly," she is thinking, but professes herself enchanted by him and shakes his hand with energy. "And Monsieur Jacques," says Giovanni, "one of our finest customers." "Enchanté, madam," says Jacques with his most dazzling smile, of which she, in responding, produces the most artless parody. "And this is Monsieur l'Américain," says Giovanni, "otherwise known as Monsieur David, Madame Clotilde," and he stands back slightly. Something is burning in his eyes and it lights up all his face. It is joy and pride. "Je suis ravi, monsieur," she tells me and looks at me and shakes my hand and smiles. I am smiling too, I scarcely know why. Everything in me is jumping up and down. Giovanni carelessly puts an arm around my shoulder. "What have you got good to eat?" he cried. "We are hungry." "But we must have a drink first," cried Jacques. "But we can drink sitting down," said Giovanni. "No, no," said Guillaume, to whom leaving the bar at the moment would have seemed like being driven from the promised land. "Let us first have a drink, here at the bar with Madame." Guillaume's suggestion had the effect, but subtly, as though a wind had blown over everything or a light been imperceptibly intensified, of creating among the people at the bar a troupe who would now play various roles in a play they knew very well. Madame Clotilde would demur, as indeed she instantly did, but only for a moment. Then she would accept it would be something expensive. It turned out to be champagne. She would sip it, making the most non-committal conversation, so that she could vanish out of it a split second before Guillaume had established contact with one of the boys at the bar. As for the boys at the bar, they were each invisibly preening, having already calculated how much money he and his copine would need for the next few days, having already appraised Guillaume to within a decimal of that figure, and having already estimated how long Guillaume as a fountainhead would last, and also how long they would be able to endure him. The only question left was whether they would be vache with him or chic, but they knew that they would probably be vache. There was also Jacques, who might turn out to be a bonus or merely a consolation prize. There was me, of course, another matter altogether, innocent of apartments, soft beds, or food, a candidate, therefore, for affection, but, as Giovanni's mome, out of honorable reach. Their only means, practically at least, of conveying their affection for Giovanni and me was to relieve us of these two old men, so that there was added, to the roles they were about to play, a certain jolly aura of conviction and, to self-interest, an altruistic glow. I ordered black coffee and a cognac, a large one. Giovanni was far from me, drinking mark between an old man, who looked like a receptacle of all the world's dirt and disease, and a young boy, a redhead, who would look like that man one day, if one could read, in the dullness of his eye, anything so real as a future. Now, however, he had something of a horse's dreadful beauty. Some suggestion, too, of the storm trooper. Covertly, he was watching Guillaume. He knew that both Guillaume and Jacques were watching him. Guillaume chatted, meanwhile, with Madame Clotilde. They were agreeing that business was awful, that all standards had been debased by the nouveau riche, and that the country needed de Gaulle. Luckily, they had both had this conversation so many times before that it ran, so to speak, all by itself, demanding of them nothing in the way of concentration. Jacques would shortly offer one of the boys a drink, but, for the moment, he wished to play uncle to me. "How do you feel?" he asked me. "This is a very important day for you." "I feel fine," I said. "How do you feel?" "Like a man," he said, "who has seen a vision." "Yes," I said. "Tell me about this vision." "I am not joking," he said. "I am talking about you. You were the vision. You should have seen yourself tonight. You should see yourself now." I looked at him and said nothing. "You are how old? 26 or 7. I am nearly twice that, and let me tell you, you are lucky. You are lucky that what is happening to you now is happening now and not when you are 40 or something like that, when there would be no hope for you and you would simply be destroyed." "What is happening to me?" I asked. I had meant to sound sardonic, but I did not sound sardonic at all. He did not answer this, but sighed, looking briefly in the direction of the redhead. Then he turned to me. "Are you going to write to Hella?" "I very often do," I said. "I suppose I will again." "That does not answer my question." "Oh, I was under the impression that you had asked me if I was going to write to Hua." "Well, let's put it another way. Are you going to write to Hella about this night and this morning?" "I really don't see what there is to write about. But what's it to you if I do or I don't?" He gave me a look full of a certain despair which I had not, till that moment, known was in him. Frightened me. "It's not," he said, "what it is to me. It's what it is to you, and to her, and to that poor boy yonder who doesn't know that when he looks at you the way he does. He is simply putting his head in the lion's mouth. Are you going to treat them as you've treated me? You? What have you to do with all this? How have I treated you?" "You have been very unfair to me," he said. "You have been very dishonest." This time I did sound sardonic. "I suppose you mean that I would have been fair. I would have been honest if I had, you could have been fair to me by despising me a little less. I'm sorry, but I think, since you bring it up, that a lot of your life is despicable." "I could say the same about yours," said Jacques. "There are so many ways of being despicable it quite makes one's head spin. But the way to be really despicable is to be contemptuous of other people's pain. You ought to have some apprehension that the man you see before you was once even younger than you are now and arrived at his present wretchedness by imperceptible degrees." There was silence for a moment, threatened, from a distance, by that laugh of Giovanni's. "Tell me," I said at last, "is there really no other way for you but this? To kneel down forever before an army of boys for just 5 dirty minutes in the dark?" "Think," said Jacques, "of the men who have kneeled before you while you thought of something else and pretended that nothing was happening down there in the dark between your legs." I stared at the amber cognac and at the wet rings on the metal. Deep below, trapped in the metal, the outline of my own face looked upward hopelessly at me. "You think," he persisted, "that my life is shameful because my encounters are, and they are. But you should ask yourself why they are. Why are they shameful?" I asked him. "Because there is no affection in them and no joy. It's like putting an electric plug in a dead socket. Touch but no contact. All touch, but no contact and no light." I asked him, "Why?" "That you must ask yourself," he told me. "And perhaps one day, this morning will not be ashes in your mouth." I looked over at Giovanni, who now had one arm around the ruined-looking girl, who could have once been very beautiful but who never would be now. Girl who could have once been very beautiful but who never would be now. Jacques followed my look. "He is very fond of you," he said, "already. But this doesn't make you happy or proud." "As it should. It makes you frightened and ashamed. Why? I don't understand him, I said at last. I don't know what his friendship means. I don't know what he means by friendship. Jacques laughed. You don't know what he means by friendship, but you have the feeling it may not be safe. You are afraid it may change you. What kind of friendship have you had? I said nothing. Or, for that matter, he continued. What kind of love affairs? I was silent for so long that he teased me, saying, come out, wherever you are and I grinned, feeling chilled. Love him, said Jacques with vehemence. Love him and let him love you. Do you think anything else under heaven really matters? And how long at the best can it last? Since you are both men and still have everywhere to go? Only 5 minutes, I assure you, only 5 minutes, and most of that, hellish, in the dark. And if you think of them as dirty, then they will be dirty. They will be dirty because you will be giving nothing. You will be despising your flesh and his. But you can make your time together anything but dirty. You can give each other something which will make both of you better, forever, if you will not be ashamed, if you will only not play it safe. He paused, watching me, and then looked down to his cognac. You play it safe long enough, he said in a different tone, and you'll end up trapped in your own dirty body, forever and forever and forever, like me. And he finished his cognac, ringing his glass slightly on the bar to attract the attention of Madame Clotilde. She came at once, beaming, and in that moment Guillaume dared to smile at the redhead. Madame. Clotilde poured Jacques a fresh cognac and looked questioningly at me, the bottle poised over my half-full glass. I hesitated. "Et pourquoi pas?" she asked with a smile. So I finished my glass and she filled it. Then, for the briefest of seconds, she glanced at Guillaume, who cried, "Alou rukin la, what's the redhead drinking, Madame?" Clotilde turned with the air of an actress about to deliver the severely restrained last lines of an exhausting and mighty part. "On t'offre, Pierre," she said, majestically. "What will you have?" Holding slightly aloft meanwhile the bottle containing the most expensive cognac in the house. "Je prendrai un petit cognac." Pierre mumbled after a moment and, oddly enough, he blushed, which made him, in the light of the pale, just rising sun, resemble a freshly fallen angel. "Madame." Clotilde filled Pierre's glass and, amid a beautifully resolving tension, as of slowly dimming lights, replaced the bottle on the shelf and walked back to the cash register. Offstage, in effect, into the wings, where she began to recover herself by finishing the last of the champagne. She sighed and sipped and looked outward contentedly into the slowly rising morning. Guillaume had murmured a "Je m'excuse un instant, madame," and now passed behind us on his way to the redhead. I smiled. "Things my father never told me." "Somebody," said Jacques, "your father or mine, should have told us that not many people have ever died of love, but multitudes have perished, and are perishing every hour, and in the oddest places for the lack of it. And then, here comes your baby. Sois sage. Sois chic." He moved slightly away and began talking to the boy next to him. And here my baby came indeed, through all that sunlight, his face flushed and his hair flying, his eyes, unbelievably, like morning stars. It was not very nice of